Is it really all about these 4 of the FAANG stocks that have left to report their numbers, or can the rest of the market actually matter?
Oh, I think the entire market matters, and I think that certainly the FAANG stocks get the headlines. But after a fourth quarter where analyst estimates were taken down so significantly, it seems so far it's been pretty easy for companies to beat those, muted expectations. And I don't think the FAANG stocks are an exception to that rule. So I don't think that the bar is particularly high for them to jump over this quarter.
Do they carry extra weight, Tim? Are they more important than other names?
Well, I think they're more important to other names only because we have a market that is starved for growth. And when there are companies that continue to show significant revenue growth, perhaps those companies get a little bit more attention, and perhaps they get a better multiple from the market. So I think that they matter perhaps a little bit more. And in the case of Amazon and in the case of Apple, you're talking about some of the largest companies in the S&P. So what they do will move the market.
Yeah, it's also not just about the fact that they're one of the few groups of stocks that has their own little acronym, but the fact that they are so big, which means their weight in so many widely owned ETFs is so heavy. In many cases, those 4 or 5 stocks could be 40 to 50% of some ETFs that have hundreds of holdings in them. That's why we pay so much attention, is it not?
It's absolutely correct, Brian. And I think in the age of passive investing, or even those who buy actively invested ETFs, you see these things represent 14, 15, 20, 25% of the ETF, and it really moves portfolios. So you have a market that is laser focused on the revenue growth of companies like Amazon and Netflix, and often they don't pay so much attention to the earnings.
Yeah, there's 5 elephants on one side of the ferry and 1,000 zebras on the other, but they balance out about
right.
the same way. If you had to pick out, Tim, one of those names which you believe going forward, because Netflix was last week, is the key, is there one that you could focus on?
Well, I think if you're looking for economic signals, Amazon's a pretty good economic signal. It's mostly domestic. It'll show you how the consumer's doing and how growth is going on the retail side of things. And then you could probably add Apple to that because it's a global player in smartphones. And as we look at 5G mobile and it's become the story of the year, people will be laser focused on what Apple does. So those are probably the 2 most important.
You just heard Tracy Potts talk about the Mueller report. Obviously, we can't escape that from a market perspective. Elizabeth Warren calling for impeachment. Are you surprised the Dow futures are only down 50 or 60 points? Why is the market discounting Mueller?
Well, I think what the market's recognizing is that we are likely to get any significant legislation over the next 18 months. If this report was expected to bring peace in Washington, I think people were maybe expecting something that isn't going to happen in an election cycle. And certainly Elizabeth Warren, a senator, doesn't have a whole lot of control over impeachment proceedings. That's really a House of Representatives gig. And so far, Nancy Pelosi said that they're not going to impeach. But overarching all of this is that the street loves periods of time when Washington doesn't do a whole lot. And I think that's probably the expectation over the next 18 months.
You think it's just that simple, though? I mean, the president, laying waste over the weekend on the Twitter. Using that 8-letter word that is my initials, calling it the Mueller. He's going after it. Elizabeth Warren calling for impeachment, and yet the market shrugs it off, literally just brushes the shoulder.
Well, I think what the market wants is Washington not to get in the way. I think you've seen the Fed get out of the way of the market in the fourth quarter, and now you perhaps have legislation getting out of the way. And I would agree with you, it's never that simple. But what the technology stocks in particular have been expecting is some sort of data privacy regulations akin to what Europe has. And I don't see the political will for anybody to step in and do anything over the next 18 months. So perhaps the Amazons and the Googles of the world are getting a pass now on that kind of data regulation.
Well, I see what you did there. So basically, you just said that, if I'm hearing you right, Tim, and correct me if I'm not, that because of the chaos in D.C., in particular now this sort of grenade that was thrown into the already partisan bickering, that the Amazons, the Facebooks of the world, if they were worried about any kind of legislation which could regulate them a little harder or a lot harder, they're not going to get it. They're getting a pass because of the Mueller report in some indirect way.
Well, I think so. But you add to that, there are also going to be political footballs going into the next election cycle. So there'll be a lot of headline risk in those names, but underlying it, you're unlikely to get a whole lot of legislation. And they are all moving into the advertising business, which is heavily data dependent. And if that data is not metered, well, that's a pretty good playing field for the Amazons and the Alphabets of the world.